views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Get ready for a game changer. Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, Sarah will bring you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Now here's your host, Sarah Westall.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall, and you're listening to Conscious Business Radio on the Transformation Talk Radio Network. The alternative media is really making an impact in the presidential campaign and in our country and in the world, actually. I did some research, and I was looking into what the numbers are. The alternative media is becoming a huge market. I dug deep a little bit and tried to figure out why is the alternative media really becoming in such high demand, and how much are they really becoming in demand? First, it's becoming obvious that Trump has learned to use the alternative media to his advantage. He's forging alliances with alternative media sites such as InfoWars. It's pretty clear that he has an alliance with it, or at least InfoWars is backing him in a huge way. And it's not unlike Sanders, who garnered huge support from many alternative media sites as well. Hillary Clinton now is the mainstream media candidate. Her support is almost entirely from the old guard and the mainstream outlets. These alliances are obvious when you browse the pages of HuffingtonPost.com or CNN or any other mainstream media site. But let's compare their content on their continued support of Hillary versus the content that you might see on InfoWars. It's super obvious which candidate they support. For example, on Huffington Post, this is what they put underneath every article that has to do with the presidential election. Donald Trump regularly incites political violence and is a serial liar, rampant exophobe, racist, and birther who has repeatedly pledged to ban all Muslims, 1.6 billion members of an entire religion from entering the U.S. And here are a few headlines featured on Huffington Post. Liar, racist, the nominee. And then it has a big picture of Trump below the headline. Or it says, black lawmakers, he's a disgusting fraud, with an image of Trump above the headline. Obviously, they're just saying that Trump is a disgusting fraud. So that's bad enough. And I think it's pretty bad to have the editor's note that they have. But here's what InfoWars have, and they're not quite as blatant as Huffington Post, but they're pretty bad too. Here we go. Warning, the Clintons plundered Haiti. We reveal how the Bill and Hillary screwed over hundreds of thousands of Haitians. Or proof, the military overwhelmingly supports Trump. Or Hillary bores audience while Trump knocks it out of the park. Hillary campaign gouges poorest supporters. So, I mean, with these headlines, it's really blaringly obvious who these outlets support. Okay, so these are obvious, but what people don't realize is how obvious it is to me when I started really digging into it. The mainstream media has a bias built into all their, or not all, but the majority of their stories. But why is it that they have such a bias? It's not just with the presidential election. It's with most of the stuff that they do when their stakeholders are involved. But let's think about it. If your stakeholder was your largest customer, which is what happens a lot, you're not going to write a story that's going to insult them or potentially make it so you lose their business. Now, think about it. If that customer is supporting, a whole branch of employees, if you make them mad, you might have to get rid of that whole branch. Or let's think of a stakeholder being the owner of the network. If you say something that makes them angry, you could lose your job. People don't want to lose their job. And let's think about the stakeholders as the U.S. government. The U.S. government, the White House, powerful members of Congress, they all want a story run a certain way. So more than likely, the mainstream media will comply depending on who the owner of the network is, right? That you got to follow the owner of the network's, stance on politics. But if they don't comply with a lot of the stuff the White House does, they might get cut off from important events and just information in general. And you can't have that if you're a media person that relies on that type of content. But now look at, like, in the 1980s, we were much better off because we had 50 owners of the media companies versus now where that has been consolidated to 6 owners. So what's going on is there's a lot less people who are influencing what content we're going to have. And so the stakeholders are less. So there's a lot less opinions that are being expressed in our media. When we had 50, it's much harder for any organization to control what the content is. And if a huge advertiser is one outlet's advertiser, they're more than likely not going to be someone else's advertiser. So there was more flexibility there. It was always relatively controlled by certain powers, but not like it is today. And so what that has done is it's created a huge market for the alternative media because people want this type of information. And if you look around the world, there's stories that are being published that you can't find here in the United States unless you look at the alternative media. And people are waking up to that. In fact, it gets worse when you look at the reputation of the mass media. It's at the lowest level it's ever been. People don't trust the mass media. They feel that they're being lied to, or they're misrepresenting the facts, or they're just simply providing media. I've heard someone say, and I actually kind of agree with this, that a lot of the journalists that are part of the mass media, they don't really care because their goal is to be famous, and they don't really care about doing really good journalism. And to a certain extent, that probably is true. The really good journalists leave and do something else. Or, they leave and do something else now with the alternative media because it is becoming a huge market. And so now that's why you're seeing it affect so much of the agenda. Donald Trump is actually talking a lot in his campaign about what's being said in the alternative media. And that's forcing the mass media and the Hillary campaign to actually discuss it, which is very, very interesting. Today is an exciting episode because we're bringing Alexandra Bruce, who is the owner and publisher of ForbiddenKnowledgeTV.net. It's one of the most popular alternative media sites on the internet. It's impressive because when she started her site, within 9 months, she had over 1.2 million page views a month and was in the top 0.01% of websites in the world within 9 months. So we are going to talk to her about this whole genre and what's going on with this industry. And then we're going to dive into what are some of the events that aren't being covered and some of the stories that aren't being covered in the mass media that people would be interested in. And I got to warn you, she can be pretty controversial, not because what she's bringing forward isn't necessarily based in some kind of facts, but because you don't really hear it like this. It's blatant in your face, and it's there, and the mass media won't really cover things like that. So it makes it a lot more interesting, though. So very, very good interview that is coming up here. But before we get into that interview, I want to remind you that you can go to my website at sarahwestall.com, and you can get a lot of information that I talked about now. I have the stats and a lot of information on what's going on in this industry, graphs and so forth. And I also want to tell you that my radio show airs in New York, Rhode Island, and Connecticut on 1230 WBLQ Stereo AM every Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And then it streams live on transformationtalkradio.com and other outlets as well. And after that, it goes to podcast on 90-plus different channels. So you can find it on almost any of your popular podcast channels if you prefer that. Or, of course, my website, which has all the different podcasts there and a nifty little widget so you can see and scroll down and see everything that I've done. But let's get back to this exciting subject of alternative media and all the things that are going on here. And let's welcome Alexandra Bruce to the show. Hi, Alexandra. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Your topics are in such high demand everywhere. Users on the internet and your sites and your channels on YouTube covering these topics are some of the highest rated channels on the internet and are often rated higher than the major network television. I mean, you had over 1.1 million page views each month, and it was just incredible. But the mainstream media still does not cover these issues or cover them seriously or in depth. Why do you think that's happening, even though the public really wants it?
Well, it's because the mainstream media is not really what you think it is. It's very much the propaganda mouthpiece of the White House or the government powers that be, if you will. And it's been, so there's really a huge gap between the reality of what the mass media is and what the public thinks it is. And, what one would think it's supposed to be the fourth estate and whatever. But because of this complete disconnect between reality and what is perceived in perception, this has led to a huge loss in their reputation lately, in their credibility, as the mainstream media has criminally covered up the treason, the lies and really treason in many cases perpetrated by members of the world's governments. There was a poll taken by the American Press Institute that's showing historical low in the public's trust the mainstream media, with 60% of Americans saying that they don't trust the mass media. And this was before last Sunday when Hillary collapsed at the 9/11 event, really looking like she was having a seizure and being held up by four people and having to be dragged into her ambulance, which is painted black. I mean, it's a tarted up ambulance, really.
Is it really an ambulance that they've converted?
Yeah, but that van is in fact, it's an ambulance that they've painted black and even kitted out with some sort of, pimp my ride type things that look like a Land Rover or Range Rover, rather.
Yes, interesting.
But it's not.
No,
really is an ambulance.
That's crazy. The other thing is that a lot of the journalists that have been in mainstream media, the more serious ones, are coming out and leaving and going to alternative media and saying this stuff, saying, I can't do what I want to do. They won't let me. And when I do, I get in trouble.
That's true.
And so the whole industry the whole industry is changing. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's because the culture is changing. That like so much else that has shaped our world, in our lifetimes, and the past 2.5 decades or so, the internet is altering the culture completely, and
and it's altering the culture, and people are going to the internet more. And you see it with Trump and his campaign, because he's actually using alternative media. He's talking about a lot of these topics in the campaign.
Yeah, he is. I think that he's definitely, he's somewhat teamed up with Alex Jones, and I think learning, getting advice about how to, about that, because I don't think he really personally understands the internet very well, but his kids or whoever is running his campaign is trying to definitely, he is the choice of the alternative news for the most part, I would say, overwhelmingly, definitely of my subscribers. And in my case, it's just anything that isn't Hillary, because if you look at her record and what's going on right now, which is unconscionable. We're talking about a presidential nominee who might be terminally ill, who might, in some cases, there are some doctors looking at her saying that she might have 1.5 years to live, and maybe 3 at the most. Like, how could this happen? This is a subversion of the total. This is like an attack on the political process.
It's really,
what
it's
is
really
really
bizarre.
going on here?
They came out and said she had pneumonia, which you would laugh at.
Doctors that I know, they're like, no, those are not the symptoms of pneumonia. We're looking at Parkinson's and possibly, and much of that coughing is a symptom of Parkinson's. It's when, basic, brainstem, controlled stuff like swallowing and breathing. She's swallowing her own spit, and that's why she's